On this episode of the Global Travel Channel podcast show, we find out what it's like to travel around the United States of America in a tiny house. Coming right up. Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. My name is Mark Philpott. On the show, we talk to people from across the world about all things related to travel, from amazing adventures to inspiring stories to the not so well known destinations. We cover it all. You can find all of our previous podcast episodes on our Global Travel Channel website by going to www.globaltravelchannel.com. The Global Travel Channel is a collaboration between travel writers, photographers, YouTubers, podcasters and bloggers from across the world. We bring you information that we hope makes your next travel experience an awesome one, no matter where you decide to travel to. You can also find the Global Travel Channel on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. So be sure to subscribe, like and follow us so that you can keep updated on our new content postings as and when they happen. You can even now support us through Patreon. For as little as a price of a cup of coffee per month, you can help us continue to produce our podcast show. Any contributions are gratefully received. Now on to today's show. And with over 34,000 members, the United Tiny House Association of America has arguably one of the largest tiny lifestyle support organizations in the world. And today I'm going to be talking to its founder, Mr. John Kernohan. Hey guys, John Kernohan and wife Finn Davies. Welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Hey,
Hello.
Mark. How you doing? Hello from the States.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. And listen, we have so much to talk about today, from United Tiny House Association, founder of United Tiny House, board member of American Tiny House Association, station chief at the Tiny House Station number 9, Tiny House Festivals, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on.
Well, just to clarify, I retired from American Tiny House Association this last year, so so I'm not a board member of American Tiny House anymore. So just FYI.
But everything else.
But everything else.
And the list go on. Yes, of course.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's probably another 10 things on the list that I haven't even mentioned. Now, guys, I don't know whether you know this, but we could be creating a world first here today, because I'm not too sure whether a podcast show from a sailboat in Australia with guests in a tiny house in the US has ever been done before. Yeah, I think this could be a world first.
Yes.
I'm going to go on a limb. I will bet part of the farm, not the whole farm, but part of the farm, that this is true. This is true.
So you were talking to me off air that you've done a lot of interviews, but we can categorically say now that you've never done one under these circumstances.
Guaranteed. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Now, before we start talking about all that tiny house stuff, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, and et cetera, without talking too much about the tiny house stuff, because we're going to get into that shortly.
Sure. Finn just gave me the hand gesture, giving me permission to talk.
You like it.
So Finn and I, we're known as hashtag John and Finn. And we've been together now for
almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years.
Too long.
And way too long. And people ask us all the time where we met. We met on an online dating site. I don't know if I can mention the site because of, I guess it's free advertising for them. But we met on a very popular online dating site. And I was a very arrogant, smart aleck person who wasn't trying to impress Finn, and she liked that. She was tired of all the guys who were like, "Let me fly you to Dubai and drive in my Ferrari," and I was like, "Oh yeah, you're wearing an A&F T-shirt. That's real unique." She true story. That was my opening comment. She had a picture that said, "Some people say I have a unique sense of style," was her caption. And my comment under it was, because she was wearing an A&F T-shirt, and I said, "Oh yeah, A&F, real unique." And she said,
Okay, how come this is part of the introduction?
because I love sharing that story. Because I love sharing that story.
It's a great
Just
story.
skip it already.
We've been together since. I was living in Florida here in the United States, and Finn, who's originally from Thailand, after she got her college degree, her bachelor's degree at the, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Thammasat?
What?
Your university in Bangkok.
Oh, yeah, just a moment.
Thammasat, did I say it right?
Something like that.
Something like that. Okay, there you go. After she got her degree, she moved to London, and she had been living there for 11 years, and that's when we met. And the rest, unfortunately, is history.
I gotta tell you guys something, because it's kind of like the reverse dating process here. Like, I'm going to tell you, when I stalked you guys online a couple of years ago and I first connected with you, was there was something about exactly what we're hearing now, this energy that you guys share together and you put out there, that attracted to me connecting with you. I just thought these two are really cool. Okay, they're on the other side of the world and we're in the tiny house space together at the moment, and I've got to reach out and I've got to connect with these guys. So very much that's the reverse psychology that I'm using on how I stalked you guys down and got connected way back when. Yeah. So there we go.
Now, you're too sweet.
We're going to be listening and talking to you about tiny houses today, which is really cool. Now, I thought we'd start off by, we've got listeners all over the world, and when we start talking about tiny houses, people in different countries might have a kind of a different impression what a tiny house actually is. So can you give us your definition of what a tiny house is?
Sure. Community-wise, industry-wise, the purest definition, if you will, is a residential dwelling that's under 400 square feet. And the popular TV shows such as Tiny House Nation and shows such as that with Zach Giffen and HGTV and the DIY network, Tiny Life, Big Living, which we were on about 2 years ago. They typically people see the tiny houses as these towable tiny houses, such as our tiny firehouse, a house that you can hook up to the back of your truck and pull it down the road, sort of like a caravan or an RV or a camper. But also, they can be foundation based, built on the ground. But it's and different modalities, different types. Some people live in yurts, or gurs, as some people call them around the world. Some people live in what's called vardos or gypsy wagons. Some people live in caravans, as when we were over in England, as folks call them here in the United States, calling them RVs, travel trailers.
Or even a sailboat.
Or on a sailboat. In fact,
I was going to say that, like I'm talking to you guys from my tiny house today. I consider this to be a tiny house.
There you go. In fact, two of the most popular, most influential, and two people that we call really great friends and that we respect, they're our go-to people when we need counsel and advice on things in tiny house related, Gabrielle and Andrew Morrison. They actually live most of the year on their sailboat. And they are the big names in the tiny house world. Finn and I are just little teeny peas in a pod.
You're being humble there.
They've done so much though for the tiny house community in regards to the legalization of tiny houses, the international or the IRC, the International Residential Codes, and states throughout here in the United States adopting those codes for tiny houses. And they live on a tiny house. In fact, Finn's and my first experience in living tiny was in the UK. We lived aboard what's called a canal boat or a narrow boat. And we traveled. We traveled and traversed and spent time in the backcountry of the UK on the narrow boat. And Finn was all the muscle and did all the work in raising and lowering the boat in the locks, and I was good at falling in the water. So
true story.
You've just answered my next question, because I was going to ask you, how and when did you get into the whole tiny house concept? Was that the beginning of it?
We didn't really realize we were living tiny. For us, it was just, hey, this is a cool way to be. This is an adventure. Let's go for it. And we were like, hey, this is nice. We like this. He just, Finn proposed to me. I said, let's get married. And I said, show me the rings. And true story. And segue, sidebar, she had hose clamps from here in the United States. It's called Home Depot. It's a big home improvement hardware chain store. She bought hose clamps that day from Home Depot, and that was our engagement.
Beautiful,
rings.
Beautiful. I like your taste, Finn. I like your taste.
Thank you. And now that hose clamp is actually being used in the bathroom.
I love
for multi-purposes.
I love the way you've made it into a sustainable engagement.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, we were doing some plumbing work in the bathroom a long time ago, and I'm like, God, I need a little teeny hose clamp, and Finn's like,
can I have your ring?
Right here. Just here you go.
So what was the attraction of tiny house living for you guys? What kind of were the appealing things that got you into it?
When we decided to when we got married, we were debating, okay, are we going to move to Thailand, live in Thailand? Are we going to live in the UK? Are we going to live in the States? We decided to live in the States. And one of the very first observations Finn made when she came here to the United States on her first visit to my house in South Florida, in Miami, was she did not like the size of my house. It was, to her, just too big.
I just don't like cleaning. The bigger the house, more work I have to do. So I was like, you know what? Nah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Nah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm not cleaning this whole house.
So and interesting enough, before we ever thought about going tiny, that was Finn planted the seed. She looked at my house and she said, I don't know where we're going with this relationship. And I was like, hey, back down, girl. We've only been dating 3 months here. Let's slow it down a little bit. And she said, but I'm not cleaning this place. This is just too big. And I, the arrogant guy that I was, because I'm not allowed to be arrogant anymore, I said, well, I'll just hire a housekeeper. And Finn, in her philosophical mindset mode that she's always in, she was like, oh, you don't pay somebody to clean your messes in life, you clean your own messes. And then me being the arrogant guy that I was, I said, oh, well, I guess we'll live in a tiny house. Or no, I guess we'll live in a messy house. And Finn came right back and said, maybe you should think about getting rid of this big place and moving into someplace smaller. And then flash forward a couple of years, we're married, we're going to live in the States. We decided to live in the States. And Finn said, but if we're going to live in the States, I don't want to live in Miami, because we would go up to the woods in Georgia to land that we had up there, up here. And she said she just really preferred the guy, me, that runs around in the woods than the guy who drives around in Miami. She said that's the nicer guy. And she wanted us to build our own house, and she wanted it to be tiny. And I thought at first we would build a 1,200 square foot cabin. We would hire an architect. We would get a contractor. And Finn, calm down, cowboy. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to build it ourselves. And it's going to be 500 square feet or smaller. It's going to be smaller. And that's how it all started. We didn't know about the tiny house movement. We didn't know about the television shows. We knew that there were people who built little cabins and they lived in the woods and they liked to be off grid and that they like smaller footprint. We knew about this, but we had no idea that there was this huge universe out there, that there were all these people, this whole community of people around the world who were living tiny. We actually got into it by the oddest of chances. After we built our house, we bought a shell. We had it delivered, and then we did everything. It was just an empty shell, and then we just did everything to it. And So we're living in it. Life is good. And then somebody pointed out to us that they reached out to us and they like, you're selling your little cabin, your little house. And we're like, no, we live in it. And they're like, you need to go to this website. There's a website out there that specializes in people listing their tiny homes for sale. Somebody took pictures of our little cabin off our Facebook page, and they created an account on this website,
goodness.
and they had 4 or 5 different little houses out there that they were fraudulently selling that weren't theirs, and one of them was ours. And so when this was pointed out, and nothing bad happened that we're aware of, as far as we know, it was all shut down and nobody got ripped off, and but our initial reaction was, oh my God, somebody's trying to sell our house. Immediately followed by, oh my God, they build these things on trailers. We were like, why didn't we think about that? That would have been awesome. And that's how we got into we started then going to tiny house Facebook pages, and we started learning more about what people were doing, and we started realizing we weren't unique. We thought we were part of like this fringe, weird group of people. I grew a beard, and I look like some mountain guy and my beautiful wife, and we're just doing our own little thing in the wood. And then we found out we were just one of many people doing the same thing in our own different ways. And that's how we got into the tiny house world.
Finn, what attracts you the most to tiny house living?
Easy to clean. That's my number one reason.
She's not kidding.
I'm not kidding. And then the second one would be so I can keep track on John at all times. So with the big house, I don't know where is he at. With the smaller house, then I know that he's just sitting there. I can see him the whole time. I know exactly what he's doing. Yeah, that's it.
You know what he's up to.
That's my reason. Nothing fancy.
You've just motivated and inspired millions of wives to go into tiny house living.
Exactly.
Keep a track on their husband. Where are you? I'm down here.
Yeah, you right here. I can see you.
Now I'm gonna ask you guys what I think is a fairly obvious question, but maybe if we think a little bit deeper about it, there is a different answer. But my question is, can anyone live in a tiny house?
I would say not for everybody, particularly when if you're a couple, you might need your personal space. Like John, when we first started it, he felt a little too close, like he would need his personal. Okay, you know what? Why you don't just explain how you actually felt back at that time?
Yeah, during the first year, Finn could tell something was wrong. Like I wasn't jacked up like I was, and she's like, "Okay, what's going on?" She could read me, and I'm like, "I think this was a mistake. I miss having my own space. I miss my being able, because down in Miami, I had a 2,500 square foot house and then this 900 square foot attached apartment. And that apartment was, quote, my office. I just had a desk and a chair and my computer in there. And so that's Finn was actually referring to when she said she didn't know where I was or what I was doing. Go outside and take a walk, because we live on a big piece of property with a lot of land. She said, if you need your personal space, you got it outside. Take it. And when we talked about it, I realized how silly I was defining and actually confining myself. Here I am in this big, beautiful area, and I had limited myself in my head that I needed my own space by confining myself to a room, meaning my room back in Miami, and Finn was just and as soon as we talked about it, that whole feeling went away, because I felt embarrassed, because as the words rolled out and as Finn was sharing. You got look outside. I mean, how much space do you need? To go back to your question, I believe a lot more people can do it who probably say to themselves, oh, I could never do that. I think they would be surprised that they actually can do it if they gave it a shot. But is it for everybody? I'm going to say no. I mean, just like for us now living in a big house, is not something I want to do.
I think this is a really interesting part of the conversation, because I think in terms of it's like a lot of things in life, unless you've actually tried
Yep.
it. And I think you're a lucky man, John, and you know it, because Finn was giving you the vision all along to go, come on, we don't need to live in a big grandeur house. We can live in a smaller space, and we can embrace all the benefits that come from that. But I think in terms of, I went through a similar process when I came and started living on the boat for the first time, because I hadn't done it before. I didn't realize, I guess, all the true benefits from coming and doing that. And you have the same experiences with being so close to nature and connecting to nature. I love the water, so being on the water for me is like just such an incredible experience every day, to be able to look out my back door per se and see dolphins going past and turtles, and it's just incredible, right? So, but unless you've actually put your foot into the water, so to speak, figuratively, you don't know what it's like. So I think a lot of people out there who go, oh gosh, I need my third bedroom or my fourth bedroom for my guests, where are they going to stay if they come and visit? Well, if you've got a tiny house, you're going to adopt and adapt and change, right? And
Sure.
you'll find a way to figure it out. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a great answer. Now, I'm really interested to know what's the typical demographic of a tiny house owner in the United States?
That's a really common question. And I always respond with this answer. Anywhere from hemp sandal, granola packing individuals to Gucci loafer, Rolex wearing individuals. The demographic is vast and wide. We meet a lot of people in our travels, and I organize these big tiny house festivals around the country, these 4 charity events. I mean, there are people who they're from my generation, like they're all from Woodstock, I mean, they're from like the 60s and early 70s. There's people...
Do you mean older people?
Yeah, yeah, older people, okay? Yeah. Yeah, older people.
All right. Let's just make it simple.
Yeah, and
right.
make sure you brush your teeth before you go to bed tonight, okay? And
citizens with a lot of wisdom, Finn. That's what we call ourselves.
There we go. All right. Well,
there you go.
I'll take that.
Now, if I can just remember all that wisdom, life would be good. Folks who are very affluent, older folk, millennials. We see younger folks. Folks who are described as urbanites. We see good old country boys and girls. It's a hodgepodge. It's a collection. There's no single one demographic.
Is there any gauge or statistics on how many people live in tiny houses in the US?
Tiny spaces, I like to say millions. And the reason is, and people go, what? People kind of forget that for a long time, the plus year history of this country, that people have been living tiny since day one. I mean, people kind of forget about the 90 square foot apartments that saturate New York City and Manhattan, the 100 square foot and smaller apartments throughout Chicago. People have been living tiny for a very, very long time. And for some reason, people don't think twice about that. It's like, hey, that's just part of city living. But then when somebody builds a house intentionally of that small size, all of a sudden it's something, well, this is very unique, or this is very out of the ordinary. When the reality is we've just taken what people have been doing for an extremely long period of time. We're just doing it in a different style, a different modality, a different look. Data-wise, how many people are doing what we're doing? Nobody has any real data on it. I mean, people are always throwing numbers around. We hear people throwing numbers around. I just don't want to be one of those people who just, well, there's this many people. Who knows? I do know this. There are a lot. House festivals, we've seen over 60,000 people at them. Now, they're not all living tiny.
That's almost getting up to Burning Man numbers.
Not quite, but thank you. We always troll big events like Burning Man and look at them and say, someday. Those are folks who really know what they're doing. Finn and I, we have no playbook on what we're doing. We just kind of like, let's have a festival in this state at this town, and all of a sudden it just comes together and we do it.
From what I've been seeing over the last few years, it's coming together pretty well. We're gonna talk about the festival soon, but I want to get back to the actual concept of the tiny house, because there's a lot of people listening today who might be sitting on the edge and saying, "Well, I'd really like to get into this. I want to know a bit more about how to do it." So, what would you say is the typical design of a tiny house? Because when you see them on the TV shows and in real life, I guess you've only got such a small space to be able to put a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom. Are the designs all fairly typically the same?
Absolutely not. Everybody is so different in what they're doing. I mean, some people follow blueprints. There's a lot of, like there's a company out there, one of the companies that's been around since the beginning of what I call the modern tiny house movement. And so there's a lot of houses out there based on their original blueprint designs. And a lot of those have a similar look. But as time has progressed, especially in just the past 5 years, the designs and architecture materials
and creativity that people actually, a lot of tiny houses, people DIY to suit their needs. And when we talk about tiny houses, not limited to just tiny house on wheels. We're talking about school buses that converted to tiny house, and van conversion and things like that. And people just have this imagination and or creativity that this is the freedom that we can build our own house to whatever that we want.
Yeah.
It's like the houses, like, have a block blueprint and you have to do this or that, but this is like built from the ground up and you can just do however you want it. I think that kind of gives people some sort of like motivation or, some sort of like freedom, some sort of like creativity to do whatever that they wanted, that they might not be able to do it if they live in a normal house.
It's
You talked about the modern generation of tiny houses just a moment ago.
Yes.
When did that era actually start? What was the chronological timeline of that?
Probably about 2010-ish. 2011, somewhere in that area, is where things really started getting more popular and more well known. And by, say, 2013, it was all over the place. We were seeing television shows, we were seeing things popping up in newsstands. We were starting to see these appearing in Huffington Post and AOL, and especially in the past 5 years, have we seen this huge surge in the tiny house movement.
Now, has some of that been attributed to the cost of living continuing to rise in some places across America? Yeah.
That's a great question. I attribute part of the surge is the 2008-2009 financial and real estate crisis that not only here in the United States, but a lot of the world experienced, gave a lot of people an opportunity. I mean, so many people lost so many things. So many people lost houses, lost jobs, lost their investments, had to use their savings. I mean, 2010 here in the United States was a really rough time for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people, and everywhere. The beautiful part about all of that was it gave everybody this opportunity. It gave a lot of people an opportunity to decide that they no longer wanted life owning them, but they wanted to own their life. And it gave them an opportunity to decide, what is it that I want? How do I want to own my life? Do I want to go back in debt? Do I want to go back and have a McMansion? Do I want to just do it easier and simpler and smaller? A lot of people had to start all over again. And in that process of starting all over again, they decided, I'm starting all over again, literally with nothing. I lost my car, I lost my house, lost my job. Why do I even want to go to that route again? That they can own quicker, that they can have much more equity in at a earlier pace, at an earlier time frame. And so tiny houses fall right into that mindset and that business plan and that financial philosophy.
I'm interested to know what's the kind of entry-level cost of getting into a tiny house in the United States today?
Again, it comes down to just like conventional housing. How big? What do you want in it? Even the difference between having it towable on a trailer and having it on a foundation, there's cost factors involved there. A decent size house in our area here in the Southeast United States, say a 16-foot tiny house trailer, meaning on a 16-foot trailer with all the bells and whistles and amenities and beautiful, cool stuff and everything, and like really artistic looking and, unique, not cookie cutter, but unique, one of a kind of design. Folks are going to probably be looking at mid upper 20s to mid 30s thousand.
I just want to get back to the financial aspect here, because you've had half of our Australian audience fall off their seats today when you talked about the price of the tiny house being around about 20 to 30,000. Our average house price where I am at the moment around this area is around about $595,000.
Well, if you go for a big house, like a conventional house, yes, it's going to cost you money, a lot more. And on these tiny houses, at the same time, the bigger you get and the more things you put in them and the more stuff you do and things of that nature, they're going to cost more.
Let's get into talking about the amazing festivals that you guys organize across the country and you're traveling to. Tell us how that started. What are the locations of the festivals as we sit here today and talk to each other?
And believe it or not, Finn is still sitting here, but now she's eating General Chow chicken, tofu, fried tofu. So for the listening, yeah.
You better hurry up, Finn, because I've got a question coming your way in a minute.
So for the listening audience, before we started recording the show, I was sharing with Mark how Finn likes to eat food during interviews, which you would never guess if you saw her. She's so small. So we started an organization back in August 2015 called the Georgia Tiny House Association. And then shortly after that, we reincorporated and renamed it the United Tiny House Association because we started getting calls outside of our state, people asking us for assistance and help and advice on their tiny house journey. We came to realize that tiny house events, celebrations of tiny houses, there was really nothing going on along the East Coast and in the Southeast or really anywhere other than out in Colorado and out in the West Coast of the United States. And so we wanted to have a big celebration party. We did our very first festival back in March 2016 here in the hometown that we retired to, here in the state of Georgia. And we thought it was going to be a little teeny event. 2 or 3 houses, burgers, barbecue, and a bonfire. Maybe who built the best ladder into their loft. We really had no idea what we were doing. We just thought, let's have a party. And through Facebook, about 200 people said they wanted to come. And we realized we didn't want 200 people using our composting toilet. So true story. And so we decided, well, we better rent a porta potty. And then we decided we better not have it out here. We better find a venue to have this at. So we found an event venue, a farm where they have like festivals and parties. And when the whole thing was done, we had over 5,000 people come that weekend, and we had 19 tiny residences, tiny houses, yurts, bardos, gypsy wagons, van conversions, just a whole bunch of cool stuff. And we made a handsome net profit. And we didn't do it for the money. So we just did it for a party, but we didn't want to finance this whole thing. We took the net profit from that whole thing, which was a considerable amount, and we gave it all away to the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce of a town, that the town could use some money. It was going through hard times. Mm-hmm. We realized 2 things. We realized, 1, never give money to the chairman of a chamber of commerce, and two, we were onto something. And we realized, hey, we live tiny houses are popular, and we can do this for good work, for charity, for philanthropy efforts. So then we had our next one in Florida. We were asked by a good friend of ours, Shorty Robbins, who lives in a tiny house. She has a what's called a historic tiny house. It's a replica of a time period home, Victorian era home, and she gets all dressed up in the big teacup dresses, which I find amazing. She can actually fit in her tiny house in that dress. And so we went down to Florida and we did an event. We thought we were going to have like 5,000 or 10,000 people now because, we had 5,000 people at the last event, and we ended up having over 60,000 people. And we had 97 tiny houses come out.
How did you publicize this event?
Finn's degree is in communications and in advertising. So she has all this great talent in being able to do stuff. If you see all of our social media stuff and all of our posters and advertising and stuff, Finn creates all that.
Finn, we need to talk. I need to get my podcast out to the world.
She and then back in the day in Florida, I used to, as a side hustle, I used to organize music festivals as a fundraiser to raise money for scholarships for homeschool students who are college bound. Because 20 years ago, my children, who are all now grown up, they're in their 30s and late 20s, their mother and I homeschooled our children. And college scholarship opportunities 2 decades ago for homeschool students didn't exist. I decided, let's just create scholarship opportunities. So we did these things called the Family Fun Festivals, and we did these down in Florida. And so I brought that to the table. And we just kind of think weird about our events. We don't think like it's going to be an RV show. I want to shoot a tiny house out of a cannon on fire and have everybody like scream and yell, and Finn just wants me to make sure nobody gets hurt. And so, but between the two of us, we have like
the perfect storm.
We have a rule for the tiny house festivals. John's not allowed to get near pyrotechnics. So
how many festivals do you have across the country now?
We have done 13 to date. We do an annual event in Florida in November. We do an annual event in Georgia in the springtime. And then all the other events, we call them one-hit wonders. We just do them in different states. Our next event is in October in the San Francisco Bay Area. In November, we're doing our Florida event again.
So are you going to all these events in your tiny house?
Everyone we go in our tiny house. The one that we're going to do in San Francisco, we're actually thinking, instead of towing our tiny house, we're actually thinking about doing renting a van conversion, because we are experimenting with we are toying with the idea of going even smaller. And we thought that would be a good way to travel across the country, go, 3,000 miles, out to the West Coast, spend a couple of weeks in a van and see how we get along with our dog, with one of our dogs in a tiny, for traveling purposes. And so we're thinking about doing that.
You guys have to be careful here.
How's that?
Well, I can see in 10 years' time that you guys are going to downsize into living in a barrel or something.
Yeah.
Watch out.
I'll just get.
If you keep this rate of minimalization going, you're going to be living in a Jim Beam barrel somewhere.
I'll just be one of those guys with like that umbrella, the umbrella hat, the little multicolored umbrella hat in a backpack on Finn's back, and she can just like
carry.
She can make me as part of her CrossFit training. She can just run down the road with me on her back. Actually, that would,
with a line of animals behind you on a leash.
Yeah. Right. So
what a fantastic marketing photo that would be.
Yeah, there you go. Go tiny. Tiny
Go
life
tiny.
runs my life. Anyway, so we've done 13. We've got 3 more scheduled that are on the books right now that we're marketing and advertising and promoting. Our California event in October, our Florida event in November, and then our annual Georgia event is already scheduled for April of 2020. And then, but the beauty about our events is we call them the 4 charity tiny house festivals. The 13 that we've done so far, we have donated and given away just over $600,000 US from the gate proceeds to just over like 72 or 74 different nonprofits and charities and causes. We've done things. We built a tiny house for a homeless veteran and his wife through the proceeds of one of our events. We purchased a 5th wheel RV trailer for a homeless veteran and his wife. They had land to live on, family land, but they had no home. We buy equipment for volunteer fire departments across the country. That's why our tiny house, towable house, is called the Tiny Firehouse. We financially support 2 transitional homes for battered women. We buy equipment for children's hospitals. There isn't anybody we won't support. I mean, one of the days, the Son of Anarchy Cat Skinning Club, 501c3 nonprofit, is going to come to us, and I'm going to go, I don't think so. But until that day, veterans groups. We've written a check to a high school sports team, a track and field team. We wrote a check for $3,000 to them because their 18 athletes came to one of our events, and they just came out and they helped out. They helped park cars, direct traffic for 3 days. They just And they were the greatest, most respectful, kindest group of kids. They came from this inner city school, and they just showed up, and they're like, our coach said to come on out here and help you guys. And we were like, at the end of the weekend, we were like, what do you guys need? And they were like, oh, and I was like, here, you guys are great.
Do you have international guests coming to your festivals?
Bryce Langston. Do you know Bryce or know of Bryce? He's out of
New Zealand. He does the show, right? The Tiny House show.
Yeah. He does the oh my gosh, my mind just went bright. Sorry, Bryce. Yeah. Exactly.
Tiny living big or something.
Big living tiny house.
Living big in a tiny house. Bryce, if you're listening, we love you, man. Sorry for the butchering of your show name. Bryce has spoke at our event. He did an unveiling at our Florida event in 2017. Oh. He had a unique custom-made house built here in the United States by a company out of Tennessee, and I guess it's his tiny house away from home over here in the States, and so we've had him at our event.
I was more or less, rather than celebrity type people, I was thinking about are there people that might be holidaying in the United States? They hear about your festival. They come along and they join
all the time. We have people come to our events from all around the world. We had a news team come from Mongolia. Was it last year? The Mongolia news team. That was pretty cool. I was like, somebody convinced their producer for a Florida vacation. We've had people from France, Sweden, UK, Japan, Taiwan. Oh, Ben from Japan. He's the documentary guy. He came.
Plenty of different people.
Yeah. Lots of folks travel in.
Is there many people that are actually using the tiny house on wheels to travel around the United States like an alternative to an RV, a caravan type situation? Or are they mainly located on property and they're not being towed too far?
Both. There's two types of folks out there. There's folks like Finn and I who have a place. We own our own land, so we call this home base. We travel when we want to. Two tiny houses out here. Our permanent foundation house and our towable tiny house. And when we're on the road, we just tow our tiny house. And when that trip's over, we come home. Most people who have tiny houses have a single home or a single tiny house. They are either traveling, enjoying life. And when I say tiny home, I'm talking about folks with buses, bus conversions, or schoolies. A school bus conversion is commonly referred to as a schoolie. But schoolies, tiny house on wheels, van conversions. People are traveling. People are in motion. They might settle down and spend a month or so at a certain location, and then they're on the road again.
Something else I wanted to ask you, John, was down here in Australia, there's quite a lot of challenges around particularly tiny houses on wheels with the local councils and state authorities when it comes to regulations and stuff. There's quite a lot of fear factor going on about the whole tiny house movement. How does that compare to what's going on in the United States? Are the regulations when it comes to putting a tiny house on a block of land, is there a lot of red tape to go through to make that happen?
You have your zoning and building codes, and every municipality throughout the United States has their own individual codes. There are some places where it's very conducive and very supportive for either tiny houses on foundations, tiny houses on wheels, or tiny houses, or both. There are some that are conducive solely just for the foundation-based tiny houses. There are some municipalities where it's just not happening, and we need legislative changes. We need updates and information. We have places like here in our state of Georgia where the state has adopted coding and legislation to allow for tiny houses. But now all the different counties and cities and municipalities throughout the state, they don't have to adopt that. It's up to them now what they want to do. And so now it's a matter of getting the individual municipalities on board. Finn and I spend a lot of time. We travel. We even travel outside of our area. We go to different states around the country. We meet with legislative individuals. A beauty was in June 2018, Elizabeth Singleton, who is one of the most wonderful ladies in the tiny house movement based out of Arizona, who is doing doing so much for the tiny house movement and for using tiny houses as a solution, affordable housing solution, in helping people, the homeless. She's building a huge tiny house community, hundreds of tiny houses out in Arizona for people in need. I was fortunate enough where Elizabeth invited me, along with four other individuals, to Washington, D.C., and we met with the Undersecretary of HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And there we were in the nation's United States capital, Washington, D.C., with HUD, and discussing the recognition of tiny houses as a viable solution for as a residential dwelling. That then springboarded to June of this year. For the second time, Washington, D.C., HUD had their Innovative Housing Summit. They did one back in 2009. And this time, they actually invited to the table tiny houses. And so they're in D.C., up on the Capitol lawn, up there in Washington, D.C., there were two tiny houses.
Yeah, fantastic.
There were panels, people speaking, talking about tiny houses. And HUD is now looking at tiny houses as a viable option for affordable housing. So on a national level, it is now changing. New regulations for the legalization and the acceptance of tiny houses, both foundation-based and wheel-based, towable. And that, Finn and I had nothing to do with that. There's an organization, another tiny house organization known as the American Tiny House Association. That was the one you referenced in the beginning that I'm a board member of. I retired from that last year, 2018.
Right.
Their team, they've been very instrumental in making that happen. And so we're seeing it happening more and more. Atlanta, Georgia, they've accepted regulations for the acceptance of foundation-based tiny houses under 400 square feet.
So it's really starting to blossom into a fully blown solution for housing across the whole country. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And Finn and I are hoping to take this to folks such as Australia. We have a Facebook page out there called, so we did something a year ago called Tiny Houses Across America. And we did a one weekend event where we had 3 tiny house festivals that we coordinated with an organization called Tiny Fest. And so we had 3 events one weekend where we simulcast and broadcast all 3 tiny house festivals with each other. We had one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, and one in the central United States. It was a very, very big undertaking. It was really exciting. Ours was up just outside of Washington, D.C. One was right outside of San Francisco, and one was outside of Omaha, Nebraska. Well, we now have another page called Tiny Houses Across the World, which I was saving this for you, where we are planning to do the same exact thing, but with an event here in the United States, an event in Australia, and more than likely an event in Finn's home country of Thailand, and doing a weekend event, but on an international level, with the whole purpose of bringing, instead of there being just a U.S. tiny house community, our membership, we're 44,000 plus members strong, United Tiny House Association, but they come from all over the world. When I look at the members from Australia and Thailand make up our membership base, it's amazing. I mean, we have hundreds of people outside of in Thailand that are members.
Look, why don't you send me the link to that and I'll put it into the description of this podcast.
And our housing over here is so messed up, and we're in, we have a homeless issue going on, and here's an option that is working. Let's share this now with the world. And I guarantee you, Mark, there in Australia, there are things going on and people with ideas on tiny tiny options that can be big solutions that we aren't even thinking of over here. Ben and I have another program called Tiny House Rescuers.
Do you guys ever go to sleep?
Yes, Finn hits me with a brick at night and says, "Leave me alone."
Okay, good. We're gonna have to start to wrap up shortly.
Sure.
But Finn, have you finished the chicken?
Sort of, yes.
Sort of, okay, because I've got a question for you particularly, and I didn't want to interrupt you if you were eating your chicken still. I'd like to know from you particularly, because you, throughout listening to your story today and being the lady in the background who's been very instrumental in creating this vision and coaching John into downsizing his life when you guys first met. I'd like to know from you, what's the state of mind living in a tiny house versus living in a conventional suburban house? What does one's state of mind change into when you're living tiny?
Well, first of all, I must say that John just gave me too much credit on the tiny house thing. So it's a teamwork. And also, what's the state of mind living in a tiny house versus a regular convention house? I would say it just gives me a sense of freedom, either freedom of the financial burdens or freedom of times that I just bring it back to I can spend more time doing other stuff rather than just cleaning the house.
She's not kidding about that cleaning thing.
It's stuck in my mind. Yes. And also, with a smaller house, we have lesser bills to pay, so that we don't have to be stuck into we have to work all the time to support the lifestyle, rather than just right now we can just enjoy it. We feel like we want to retire, we can do so without have to have so much pressure and financial thing that we have to be worried about.
So really it's providing for the biggest gift in life, which we call freedom.
Yeah. Absolutely. And also it's bring us closer together, as a family.
That's really important.
I think that's one important thing too, because the more space you have, doing your own things, and then less communication that you will get. But because living in the confined space, you tend to commingle more often, and you communicate, and then it is more like a united kind of like closer people getting closer together, not about about us.
Fantastic. There's so many benefits associated with it. We could carry on talking for another couple of hours about it, no doubt whatsoever, but we're going to have to start to wrap up the show. John and Finn, I want to pass on to you both that I think that you're both exceptionally inspirational people. What you're doing, whether it be from a philanthropic point of view, inspiring people to downsize their life, giving people the opportunity to get connected to the tiny house community for the first time perhaps in their life, is an extraordinary thing. And just keep doing what you're doing, because it's really amazing. Now, I'm going to come over to the US at the beginning of next year, and I'm going to bring my podcast show on the road. And I'm going to be doing an adventure of my own in the United States, and I'll let you know a little bit more about that shortly. But what I would love to do is have the ability to come to one of your festivals and do my podcast show live from the festival, because I think that would be really cool, and that's another way for us to get this all out to the global community, John.
Sure, absolutely, that'd be fun. And while you're here, there are so many places throughout the United States where folks can rent and live in a tiny house, even on like a one-night basis, like a hotel.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
They're scattered everywhere in the United States. One of my buddies in my hometown of Sarasota, Florida, has 15 tiny houses.
Whoa.
Right across from the beach. He rents them out like hotels, for one-night stays, like Airbnb. I mean, it's beautiful.
Airbnb.
He took an old trailer park from the 1940s, an old RV park, and vamped it all up and made it all beautiful and pretty. And instead of having RVs there, he put in tiny houses, 15 of them. It's amazing.
Fantastic. Look, before I say goodbye and end the show, I'm also having to very much thank the rest of your community in your house today. The cats have been very, very accommodating. And I'd really like you to go outside, John, and spend some time with the dog, because you put him outside before the show started. So he needs some love. He needs some love and some care. So it's been fantastic having you on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today. I'd love to have you back again for another chat in the future, so we can carry on this amazing conversation. Maybe we do that when you've just done your next festival. We could have you back on. You can tell us all about the festival if you'd like to do that.
Sure, absolutely. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so all the way from Australia on my sailboat to all the way over in the United States on a tiny house, John and Finn, thank you for being on the show today.
All right,
thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
There we are, Finn and John. What an amazing couple, traveling around the United States of America in their tiny house, putting on tiny house festivals that are getting more attendees than some rock stars get to their concerts. That's just absolutely fantastic. What a great episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're looking for more of our episodes from the Global Travel Channel podcast show, you can just shoot over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of our previous episodes there. I think we're up to around 45 now. Plus, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. And there's some of the other places you can find our episodes if you want to download them from there. Okay, that's it for this episode. My name's Mark Philpott. Until we meet next time, I wish you all bon voyage.